never imagined that a single, ordinary-looking afternoon, the kind where sunlight pours lazily through half-open blinds and dust dances in the warm air, could somehow unravel the threads of my entire identity, leaving me exposed in ways I didn't even know I was capable of feeling, my heartbeat echoing like a frantic drum in my chest as though warning me of something both terrifying and intoxicating. And it all began with a mirror tucked in a shadowy corner of my aunt's living room, an unassuming relic with a frame carved in delicate swirls that seemed almost alive, whispering secrets I hadn't asked for, reflecting back not the boy I thought I was, but a stranger who looked like a possibility, soft and luminous and achingly fragile, and the instant I saw him, or maybe her, I knew something inside me had shifted irrevocably, a subtle crack forming in the solid foundation of who I had believed myself to be, pulling me into a world I had never dared to explore. Her instructions came softly, almost imperceptibly at first. My aunt, with her keen eyes and gentle insistence, began guiding me. "You'll start small," she said, her voice a mixture of warmth and authority. "Every choice matters." I felt a flutter of defiance, the instinct to resist, but it quickly drowned under curiosity that smelled like perfume and candle wax. She handed me the first piece of clothing, a delicate blouse, soft as the sky before rain, and my fingers trembled as I touched it. The fabric seemed alive, and somehow it was already shaping me. The first time I looked at myself fully dressed, I didn't recognize the reflection. My face looked softer, my shoulders narrower, my hair brushing just past my collarbone. The sensation of seeing myself like this was electric, a mix of exhilaration and something heavier, guilt, perhaps, or shame, or maybe a strange grief for the boy I thought I had been. My heart raced as she adjusted the collar, her fingers gentle but precise. I wanted to protest, to pull away, but I couldn't. Part of me craved the transformation, as if the mirror had whispered a secret I had been waiting to hear all my life. Walking through the house felt different after that. Every creak of the floorboards echoed in my chest like an alarm I couldn't silence. I caught glimpses of myself in every reflective surface, each one asking the same question: who are you really? I began to notice the subtle shifts in my posture, the way my hands hovered differently when I moved, the careful, almost imperceptible tilt of my head. My voice, too, began to feel strange in my mouth, lighter, hesitant, as if discovering new dimensions of sound. And yet, even as I reveled in it, panic snaked through me. What if someone found out? What if I couldn't turn back? It was in that moment, caught between reflection and reality, between fear and desire, that I realized this journey wasn't just about clothing or appearance. It was about unearthing something hidden, something I had buried beneath layers of expectation and habit. The blouse clung to me not just physically but emotionally, wrapping me in a strange comfort I couldn't name. I felt both trapped and free, and that contradiction gnawed at me, sharpening the edges of my thoughts and emotions. She smiled at me then, knowingly, and handed me a brush. "Tomorrow, you'll learn to finish the transformation," she said, and my stomach twisted with anticipation and dread. I didn't yet know what that meant, and part of me didn't want to know. But deep inside, a voice whispered that I had crossed a point of no return. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the fabric of the blouse pressed against my skin, wondering how much of the boy I had been was still inside me, and whether I even wanted him back. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains in uneven streaks, painting the walls gold and making every shadow look sharper, more deliberate. I lay there for what felt like hours, my fingers tracing the folds of the blouse I had slept in, feeling the soft fabric like it carried the imprint of a life I hadn't yet fully claimed. Every sound in the house, footsteps in the hall, the faint hum of a kettle, the distant chirping of birds, seemed louder, almost accusing, as though the world had suddenly become hyper-aware of the changes stirring within me. I wanted to pull the covers over my head and hide, to stay in the boy I had known, safe and uncomplicated, but my body, my mind, even my reflection in the darkened glass of the window whispered something different, something impossible to ignore. When she appeared in the doorway, her smile was patient but unmistakably firm. "It's time," she said, and my throat went dry. I wanted to argue, to say I wasn't ready, but the words dissolved into the air. I rose slowly, feeling the subtle shift in my balance as I adjusted to the new curves forming in my shoulders, in my chest, in the way my hips caught the light when I moved. She guided me to the mirror again, and this time there was no hesitation, only the quiet pull of inevitability. Her hands were steady as she brushed my hair, smoothing it into a cascade that felt foreign and intimate all at once. I felt exposed, like the mirror wasn't just reflecting me, it was unearthing me, peeling away layers I hadn't known existed. Then came the makeup. The very word made my stomach twist, but she approached it with reverence, almost like she was performing a ritual rather than applying cosmetics. Each stroke, each touch, carried a weight I couldn't name. I watched the reflection shift, my features softening, my eyes widening, my lips fuller and impossibly delicate. The boy I had been was still there in flickers, shadows at the edges of my new face, but the person staring back at me demanded attention, and my chest ached with an odd mixture of pride, fear, and longing. I couldn't breathe right, not entirely, because every inhalation reminded me that I was crossing a boundary, leaving behind a version of myself I could never fully retrieve. When she handed me the first skirt, a simple A-line that swayed just above my knees, I felt a shiver I couldn't explain. I was aware of every inch of skin, every movement, every subtle gesture my body made as it learned to inhabit this new form. Walking became an experiment, each step a negotiation between past habit and present transformation. My hands hovered awkwardly, unsure if they belonged to me or to this new identity, and I caught myself in the hall mirror again, barely recognizing the soft curve of my jaw, the gentle arch of my brows. I was learning to inhabit my own body differently, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. We spent hours in that room, a slow, careful dance of color, fabric, and reflection. She talked to me the entire time, not just instructions, but stories, anecdotes, whispered reassurances that made the air feel heavy and sacred. Each time I glanced at my reflection, I felt a surge of something primal, something electric, a trembling awareness that this wasn't just play or curiosity. This was awakening. And yet, alongside that thrill, a sharp pang of guilt twisted in my chest. Who was I becoming? Was I betraying the boy I had been, or simply discovering the girl I had always been meant to find? By evening, when the transformation felt complete, I sank into the armchair in the corner, exhausted, trembling, my reflection softened by the dim light of the room. I couldn't stop staring. Every detail was new. The tilt of my head, the curve of my lips, the way my hair fell over my shoulders, but it all felt inexplicably right. I felt small and powerful at once, delicate and invincible. And in that paradox, I realized the truth I had been afraid to admit. I wanted this. Not just the clothes, the makeup, the reflection, but the feeling of inhabiting a self that felt closer to who I was meant to be. As night fell, I wrapped myself in the blouse again, now worn and intimate like a second skin. I lay awake, thoughts spinning in endless loops. Would the world accept me if I revealed this self? Could I accept myself without fear, without guilt? The questions didn't have answers yet, but I felt something shift deep inside, a seed of courage, fragile and trembling, promising that even if the journey was long and uncertain, it was mine to take, one breath, one step, one reflection at a time. The next morning felt heavier than the one before, though the sun still poured through the blinds in careless streaks, illuminating the quiet chaos inside me. Standing in front of the mirror, I traced my reflection like a map, every curve, every subtle shift in my posture, every delicate tremor in my hands feeling like a secret ritual only I could witness. I noticed the way my shoulders had narrowed, how my neck seemed longer, more vulnerable, and how my eyes, those same eyes, held a strange, hesitant light, curious yet guarded. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, my fingers lingering longer than necessary, as if testing the boundaries of this new self. She appeared silently, as if sensing my hesitation, and without a word, began laying out clothes for the day. Each item seemed carefully chosen, not just for appearance, but for effect, guiding me into a world where every fold of fabric, every ribbon, every shade of color mattered. I slipped into a soft blouse and a flowing skirt, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the fabric, the way it moved with my body, and for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just clothing, it was armor, a way to present myself to the world and to myself in a language I was only beginning to understand. We practiced walking, posture, even gestures. I felt clumsy at first, my body stiff and uncoordinated, but she guided me with patience and subtle corrections, her hands adjusting my shoulders, her voice soft but insistent. I caught myself in the mirror again, startled by the elegance forming in movements I didn't know I could make. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. I was learning to inhabit a self I had only glimpsed in secret fantasies, a self that demanded attention even when I wasn't ready to claim it fully. And yet, the reflection was not without its shadows. I noticed flickers of the boy I had been, the stubborn jawline, the hesitant tilt of my chin, the lingering tension in my hands, and for a moment, a pang of grief washed over me.
Who was I now?
Was I erasing him, betraying him, or was he still part of me, buried beneath layers of silk and blush and deliberate grace? The questions twisted in my chest, sharp and insistent, and I realized the journey wasn't just outward, it was inward, a confrontation with every hidden fear, every forbidden desire, every fragment of identity I had never allowed to breathe. When she introduced accessories, simple earrings, a delicate necklace, a scarf, I felt an unexpected thrill. Each addition transformed me subtly but unmistakably, shaping the way the light caught my hair, the way shadows softened along my jawline, the way my own eyes seemed to sparkle differently. It was like discovering a new language in which I could speak without words, a language of presence, of subtlety, of attention to detail. I wanted to speak it fluently, to immerse myself completely, yet part of me hesitated, terrified of what others would see if they glimpsed this version of me too soon. We ventured outside later in the day, to a quiet street where the world felt enormous and indifferent all at once. My heart pounded as I stepped onto the pavement, every sound magnified, every glance of passing strangers a potential judgment, a silent test I wasn't sure I could pass. I caught my reflection in shop windows and car mirrors, and each time, the thrill of recognition was paired with an almost unbearable anxiety. I was visible now, not just to myself, but to everyone. And in that visibility, a strange power stirred, mingled with fear. By evening, when we returned, I collapsed into the armchair again, exhausted in body and spirit. My reflection in the dim light seemed almost dreamlike, a fragile, glowing version of myself I barely recognized but could not deny. I traced the line of my jaw, the curve of my cheek, the soft sweep of hair across my shoulder, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel pride, not just in appearance, but in courage, in willingness to explore, in the quiet strength it took to inhabit this new identity, even for hours, even in private. Alone later that night, I sat cross-legged on the floor, blouse soft against my skin, skirt folded around me like petals, and felt the weight of both worlds pressing together. The boy I had been, the girl I was discovering. The tension was dizzying, yet beneath it, there was a strange serenity, an acceptance that I could not yet name. I was standing at the edge of something vast, a journey that demanded patience, honesty, and relentless courage. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that I was ready, that this self, fragile and trembling though she was real, and it was mine to claim, one reflection, one breath, one step at a time. The following week felt like stepping into a world I had never truly inhabited before, a world that both fascinated and terrified me in equal measure. My aunt insisted we practice venturing beyond the confines of the house, into spaces where the reflections weren't just mirrors but other people's eyes, casual or curious or occasionally sharp. I felt exposed in a way that made my stomach churn, Every glance from a passerby felt magnified, every whisper or laugh imagined as if directed at me, a test I hadn't yet consented to take. We started small, the corner bakery, a quiet park, a narrow street lined with shops. Each time, I noticed subtle changes in myself, how I adjusted the tilt of my chin, the sway of my hips, the way my shoulders dropped or tensed depending on my mood. I became hyper-aware of my voice, forcing it lighter, softer, smoother, testing it in ways that felt both unnatural and exhilarating. Even a simple greeting to a stranger sent waves of adrenaline through me. Some part of me wanted to flee, to retreat into the boy I had been, while another part, an insistent, aching part, thrived on the attention, on the delicate, fragile power of being seen in this way. The first time someone smiled at me and complimented my outfit, I froze, caught somewhere between shock and delight. My heart galloped. My fingers twitched as I thanked them softly, voice lighter than I had expected, almost foreign in my own mouth. That single interaction left me trembling for hours, a mix of validation, guilt, and disbelief swirling inside me like a storm I couldn't name. Could this new self be accepted outside the safe walls of my aunt's home? Could the world tolerate her, and could I tolerate being so exposed? Back inside, she encouraged reflection, guiding me to examine every feeling without judgment. Every reaction matters, she said, her eyes gentle but piercing, as though she could see not just what I wore, but what I carried inside. I traced the contours of my reflection, noticing how the soft blush on my cheeks caught the light, how my hair framed my face in ways I had never imagined, and I realized that the clothing and makeup weren't just layers. They were extensions of myself, tools to navigate a world I had only glimpsed from the shadows. Yet the journey was not without friction. There were moments when the boy I had been resurfaced in anger or frustration, a harsh word slipped, a clumsy gesture, a frustrated sigh, and I would feel a pang of guilt, as if betraying both identities simultaneously. My reflection sometimes startled me, eyes catching the hesitation, the tension, the unresolved conflict, and I wondered if I was creating a new self at the expense of erasing the old, or simply revealing a hidden truth that had always been there. One evening, we attended a small gathering at a friend's house, a safe space she had chosen for exposure, without threat. My pulse thundered as we approached, and every step felt like walking on glass, fragile and potentially shattering. Inside, laughter and conversation swirled around me, and I became acutely aware of how I occupied space, how I moved, how I sounded. At first, I stayed quiet, observing, testing, adjusting. But gradually, as I grew more comfortable, I found myself participating, small gestures, soft laughter, subtle engagement, and a strange sensation settled over me. I belonged, at least in that moment, as this version of myself. And yet, the tension never fully dissipated. When a friend glanced my way with curiosity, or when a reflection caught my eye in a polished surface, I felt a pang of doubt, a fear of exposure, a question hovering in the air like smoke. Who am I now, and who will I be tomorrow? Could this balance hold? Or was I teetering on the edge of something irreversible? I realized then that this transformation was not a single act but a series of choices, a continuous negotiation between past and present, between fear and desire, between concealment and revelation. That night, after everyone had left, I sat on the floor in my room, skirt folded neatly around me, blouse soft and warm against my skin. My reflection caught in the window pane showed a girl who was at once fragile and radiant, hesitant and audacious, a girl I wanted to protect and yet set free simultaneously. The emotions coursing through me were dizzying: exhilaration, pride, fear, longing, and a quiet, almost imperceptible grief for the boy I had been. Yet beneath it all, a persistent, trembling certainty emerged. This journey was mine, and each reflection, each exposure, each carefully measured step was a declaration that I could no longer hide, not from the world, and not from myself. And in that fragile, luminous moment, I realized something I hadn't dared to acknowledge before. Being seen wasn't just about others. It was about daring to see myself fully, without apology, without shame, without retreat. And though the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with doubt and challenge, I felt a flicker of courage, a fragile spark that whispered I was ready to embrace the world as her, to inhabit the reflection in the glass, and to navigate the space between who I had been and who I was becoming with all the tenderness, audacity, and grace I could summon. The following days stretched into a strange, vivid blur, each one a careful negotiation between my old habits and the new self I was learning to inhabit. Morning light had begun to feel different, softer somehow, almost conspiratorial, as if it knew I was no longer just waking as the boy I had been, but stepping into a girl I was still discovering. My reflection became a constant companion, sometimes comforting, sometimes unyielding, insisting I acknowledge every shift, every tremor, every hidden corner of my emotions. I grew obsessed with details, the curl of a hair, the delicate slope of my shoulders, the subtle cadence of my voice, and in that obsession, I began to realize that transformation was not only external. It was a dialogue with my own mind, a conversation between fear and longing, between guilt and exhilaration, between hesitation and desire. One morning, I walked to a nearby cafe alone, carrying the careful confidence she had been nurturing in me. The streets felt alive in ways I had never noticed before. Even the ordinary clatter of footsteps, the distant hum of traffic, the rhythm of people moving through their lives felt like part of an unseen choreography I was finally permitted to join. Each glance I received from strangers, each subtle acknowledgement of my presence, sent tiny jolts of electricity through me, and I realized how acutely aware I had become of the language of observation, the way the world reads posture, voice, expression, the way the smallest details can communicate identity without a single word. Inside the cafe, I took a seat by the window, watching reflections overlap with reality. I sipped my drink slowly, noticing the way the sunlight kissed my hair, how the skirt moved with my body, how my fingers brushed delicately against the cup. I caught myself smiling at my reflection, startled by the audacity of recognition, the thrill of being fully seen by myself. But the moment was tempered by a shadow, a whisper of doubt lurking at the edge of my mind. Was I really ready for this? Was I strong enough to be seen consistently, openly, without retreating into secrecy? Later, as I walked home, I faced a moment of unexpected courage. A child on the sidewalk glanced at me and smiled brightly, unguarded and unjudging, and something inside me melted. I returned the smile, tentative at first, then genuine, and felt an almost dizzying rush of affirmation, simple and unpretentious, as if the world itself had given me permission to exist in this body, in this form, unapologetically. The fear did not vanish entirely, but it shifted, softened, replaced with a fragile, trembling pride that whispered I was capable of more than I had imagined. That night, my aunt guided me in reflection, literally and figuratively. We sat together, the mirror between us catching our images, and she asked questions that forced me to confront hidden truths. "Do you recognize yourself?" she asked gently. I paused, staring at the girl in the reflection, at the softness of her eyes, at the subtle tension in her shoulders, and realized that recognition was not a single moment, but a gradual unfolding. I nodded slowly, voice almost breaking, and admitted, "I think I am starting to." The acknowledgement felt monumental. It was not triumph, it was not finality. It was something quieter, deeper, a fragile certainty that I was learning to inhabit my own presence fully, to feel comfortable with the tension of being both vulnerable and strong, uncertain and determined. She adjusted my hair, brushed my blouse, and smiled knowingly. "You are becoming yourself," she said, and the simplicity of the statement struck me with force, as though I had been waiting all my life to hear it spoken aloud. In the following days, I began experimenting with subtle self-expression in public, adjusting my walk, practicing my voice in small, controlled ways, allowing myself moments of visibility without panic. Each interaction, each careful observation of the world around me, became an act of courage, a small victory over the uncertainty that still lingered. I discovered that the reflection in the mirror was not a final goal, but a guide, a teacher, a companion urging me to inhabit life more fully, more honestly. By the end of that week, I realized that transformation was no longer merely about clothing, posture, or makeup. It was about presence, about choosing to exist in the world as myself, even when it was uncomfortable, even when fear whispered for retreat. Sitting quietly in my room that night, skirt folded neatly around me, blouse soft against my skin, I felt a profound shift. The boy I had been was still there, a shadow of memory and habit, but he no longer held dominion over me. I was learning to honor both selves, to navigate the delicate balance between past and present, and in that delicate balance, I found an unspoken strength. And as I stared at my reflection in the quiet darkness, illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlight outside, I allowed myself the rare, tremulous acknowledgement that I was not lost, not broken, not pretending. I was unfolding, slowly, patiently, beautifully, into someone I was finally beginning to recognize as entirely my own. The morning felt impossibly still, the kind of morning where even the smallest movement seems magnified, and I lay in bed, wrapped in the soft folds of the blouse I had worn to sleep, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers I had been too afraid to seek. Outside, sunlight streamed lazily through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor that shifted like liquid gold. I traced them with my eyes, my mind tracing the longer, slower path I had traveled over the past weeks, a journey that had begun in secrecy, in fear, in curiosity, and had now unfurled into something I could scarcely recognize but no longer wished to deny. Today, my aunt had promised, would be different. It wasn't about instruction or correction, about mirrors or fabric. It was about stepping fully into the world, as her, in a way that tested everything I had been learning. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. I felt my pulse in my throat as I dressed, choosing each garment carefully, not simply for appearance, but for the way it allowed me to inhabit myself. The blouse, soft against my skin, framed the gentle lines of my shoulders. The skirt, flowing and precise, swayed with each step. My hair, brushed and loose, framed my face like a halo of possibility. I studied the reflection in the mirror for what felt like hours, memorizing the tilt of my chin, the subtle curve of my lips, the light in my eyes. She was there, fully, and she was mine. Stepping outside, the air hit me like an electric current, sharp and invigorating. Each sound, each passing glance, each casual interaction with strangers became a test of presence and courage. My steps were measured, deliberate. My voice, soft yet confident. My gestures fluid but precise. I caught myself in shop windows, in passing car mirrors, in any reflective surface that offered a glimpse of who I had become, and each time I felt a surge of recognition and pride, tempered by the delicate, lingering whisper of doubt. The boy I had been, the habits and hesitations I had carried for years, hovered at the edges of my awareness, but now they felt like companions rather than chains, shadows that enriched the light instead of diminishing it. The city around me seemed alive in ways I had never noticed. Even ordinary spaces, the cafe down the street, the narrow alley where the sunlight pooled like liquid amber, the quiet bookstore where I lingered among shelves, felt magnified, vibrant, resonant. I realized, almost with a shock, that I was no longer merely passing through these spaces. I was inhabiting them. My presence mattered, subtly but undeniably, in the way the air shifted when I entered a room, in the way light seemed to kiss my hair, in the gentle acknowledgement of strangers who smiled or greeted me. And yet, alongside this thrill, there was a delicate tension, a fragile awareness that I was still learning, still negotiating the balance between exposure and safety, between who I had been and who I was becoming. At a small park later that afternoon, I paused on a quiet bench, sunlight dappled across the grass, and allowed myself to breathe fully. I watched children playing, couples strolling, people simply existing, and for the first time, I let myself truly reflect without fear or judgment. I traced the line of my jaw in the mirror of a passing window, let my fingers brush my hair, felt the skirt sway with the movement of my legs, and realized that this self, fragile, deliberate, and luminous, had been waiting for me all along. It was not a mask, nor a role. It was an awakening, a reclamation, a truth that had been buried beneath habit, expectation, and hesitation. The journey had not been linear. There had been moments of panic, of guilt, of longing for the familiarity of the boy I had been. There had been nights of trembling reflection, days of clumsy movement, whispers of doubt that hovered like shadows. But each challenge had been a lesson, each misstep a chance to grow, and each quiet triumph, no matter how small, had reinforced the fragile scaffolding of courage I was building. I realized now that transformation was not a destination but a continuum, a series of choices, a dance between fear and desire, doubt and acceptance. By evening, I returned home, sunlight fading into a golden glow that seeped through the windows, soft and forgiving. My reflection in the mirror caught me fully, and for the first time, I allowed myself a smile without hesitation or shame. It was not perfect, it was nuanced, complex, layered, but it was real. I traced the contours of my face, the gentle swell of my cheeks, the soft curve of my lips, the sweep of my hair across my shoulders, and acknowledged, finally and fully, that she was me. Not a mask, not a temporary experiment, not a role I had been forced to play. She was a revelation, a truth, a self I had been discovering all along. I sank into the armchair, skirt folding delicately around me, blouse soft against my skin, and let myself linger in the quiet triumph of acceptance. The boy I had been still lingered in memory, a shadow that no longer frightened me, a part of the foundation that had supported this emergence. And as I gazed at my reflection in the dim glow of the room, I felt the rare, exquisite clarity of self-possession. I was no longer merely discovering, I was inhabiting. I was no longer merely experimenting, I was living. And in that luminous, trembling acknowledgement, I understood that the journey would continue, that each step forward would carry both risk and revelation, and that this fragile, deliberate self, the girl I had become, was mine to guide, cherish, and honor, one reflection, one breath, one fearless step at a time. For the first time, I felt fully, irrevocably, and courageously whole.